Welcome to the Middlesized Gardens Q&A live on garden design. And I'm here with Jane Beedle, who's a garden designer and whose garden has featured quite often on the Middlesized Garden. It's a lovely contemporary garden, and you might recognise Jane also as a Great British Bake Off finalist from a few years ago. We've asked you for quite a lot of questions and we've got a whole load to get through, so I think we'll just go straight in on it. So, I think we're going to start with a group of questions that could be basically described as start from scratch. We've got one person whose chickens have completely eaten her lawn and all her plants, so she has nothing left in her garden. We have one person who is building a new house in the middle of a 2.5 acre paddock, so there really isn't any garden there. And another person who is a new gardener, moved into a house that was basically just lawn. She has dug a few beds, but she doesn't really know where to go from here. So Jane, starting from scratch with really very little to go on, what's your advice?
Starting from scratch is daunting, isn't it? Especially if you've got a large site, because you panic and you don't know where to start, and then actually just go off and have a cup of tea because it's all just too scary. I would always say start by drawing it out roughly. You don't have to have a survey unless you particularly want to spend out for one. Drawing it out roughly on a big piece of paper or graph paper to give you some sort of idea. Work out what you want to do with the garden, where you're going to house your chickens, for instance, to stop them munching all your plants. You have to work out, do you want a children's play area? Do you want a shed? Where do you want to sit? Where is the nicest place to sit? Where are you going to have your patio? Do you have somebody in the family who absolutely loves lawn and loves cutting it? Make a list of the things that you really want in your garden and then start drawing it out. I think a sort of nice, do you want it contemporary? In fact, fit lots of lovely rectangles together and then start rubbing things out to get your paths through to where you want to sit. Do you like something that's more fluid and more natural? So get your inspiration from your shapes, from not just from other people's gardens, but just from maybe a lovely sketch, a beautiful painting, and then start rubbing out and putting some colour in and going, oh, lawn would be nice there, or a bench would be nice there. I know that all sounds a bit arty and airy-fairy, but you will be very surprised how quickly you'll go, oh no, that's a perfect place to have a bench and escape from the sort of madness of the day, or the children, or the husband, or I suppose the wife, I suppose. And
I've also heard that actually it's quite a good idea, if you don't know what to start with, is to think about where your big things are and actually position those first. Things like your seating area, or if you have got the children's play area or something like that, or your sheds, and then to work your way around from there. What do you think about that?
Yes and no. In a way, you can. And the trouble is with doing that, you can end up with going, right, shed there, right, children's play area there, right, patio there. Whereas if you start with some beautiful shapes, you can enlarge them or reduce them depending on what you want to do with them. So you end up with a gorgeous flowing garden without just looking as though things have been plonked. So it's very easy with a shed. I mean, for those of you who might have seen my garden, it's very small and there is no way to hide a shed. So have a nice looking shed, or if you've already got a shed, make sure you paint it so you want to see it. So it's very different depending on how much of a space you've got. And I think these people have got quite large gardens to deal with, and large areas of lawn. What I would say, it's very easy to just make borders around the outside with maybe a round border in the middle. Try and make it much more organic and joined up. And don't worry about losing quite large amounts of your lawn, because if you've got a big garden, you've got plenty of lawn to cut. And what you want is lots of lovely interest, regardless of whether it's the summer or the winter. You want flowers, you want things for pollinators, you want to attract birds and wildlife into your garden. So don't be afraid of big borders. And I think that's the thing I used to find when I worked considerably more than I do now, is people said, oh, I don't want to do lots of gardening, I don't want big borders. And I just totally ignore them, really, and make some decent sized borders. And as long as borders are well planted, it's actually less maintenance than it is taking care of a big lawn. You've just got to get your planting right to work for you all the year. But if your border is plaqued, there's nowhere for weeds to go. So don't be afraid when you're planning a garden of having a large border. It just gives you more opportunity.
I also think one of the best bits of advice we were given when we were designing our garden, which we're not garden designers, but we did design our garden with a head gardener. And he said, think about what you want to see when you look out of the windows, or when you look out of the door, or when you go out the door. And I think that's really helpful, because what we decided we wanted is our biggest border, and it is a really big border, to be directly outside the kitchen window so that we could see it, even on a horrible rainy day. And when we come out of the back door, then we've got at the moment, it was a huge great pot with a spiral topiary in it, but at the moment we've got a sundial and some trees. So I think that's quite nice, is just think what you want to see when you look out and step out.
Absolutely. Again, going back to mine, I can see right to the end of my garden. What we try and do is break the view, regardless whether you've got a small garden or a big garden. There's a space in mine that I can see right to the end, or should have been able to see right to the end. So I put a pot there to actually stop the gaze, and then planted behind it. And it's very useful to do things like that. You could just sort of punctuate it, and then the eye then goes further on. And that sounds a bit complicated, but it's not really. And I found a spot in my garden that I wanted to put my table and chairs, but I didn't particularly want to see the people sitting there eating their dinner directly from the kitchen. So I then put a border in front of it and put some soft wafty planting in order to just, again, break that view through. So I think once you've decided what you want, where you want to sit, because that's usually the first thing you think about in the garden, check the direction of the sun, and then start building things up around that. Your seating area doesn't have to be immediately adjacent to the house, although it's quite useful if you're carrying food out, or you may more than one seating area. But do allow for plenty of planting. Where you're sitting, it's gorgeous if you're surrounded by planting as much as you can for all the lovely things. We all like being surrounded by nature. So don't be afraid of going planting instead of like patio grass shed, because that's not very interesting. But break it with some nice planting.
I don't know if you've seen your questions.
I haven't got any questions coming through on my phone.
I'll tell you what it is. I want a simple garden without many flowers, without banks and banks of flowers, lots of rows and so on. How do I make my garden look nice with a small number of flowers?
Well, I don't know whether you have a big garden or a small garden. I always like to start when I'm planning the planting, which is the most exciting thing, I think, is what's going to be there all year round. So I will look at my evergreens, and they might well be structural. Did you want to have a look, see whether you can see it coming through on there? We're struggling to get through to the live chat on my phone. So I always start with my structure. Now, it could be evergreen. It could be shaped. I've got some clipped pittosporum, which I think work really nicely. I've got some deciduous things, but I know that are going to give me some lovely winter interest. At the moment, I've got the most beautiful Acer coral bark maple, Acer sangu kaku, which when the sun catches it, which it does even when it's low in the winter, glows red from the kitchen, which even my husband can't ignore, and it's absolutely glorious. So I like to have structural plants. I like, even in a small garden, to repeat. We've had questions about how much repetition you should have in a small garden. It doesn't get too boring if you have some repetition. It also helps sort of tie various areas together. So get the structure in there first, and then put some flowers. If you don't want lots of flowers, get your colour and your interest from different shaped leaves, different heights, different colour leaves, whether you want variegated, whether you want just green, whether you want some of the beautiful purple leaves. Pittosporum Tom Thumb is a lovely one that you can use. And draw them out and think, okay, there's some circles, that's where I'm going to have lovely leaves in the winter. Something that's going to be a bit taller, again, evergreen, and then pop a few colours in there just to give you continued interest all the way through the seasons.
Yes, so that, by the way, is somebody who wanted not too many flowers in their garden. And really, the thing is, trees, shrubs, you could also look at sculpture, I think, as well, or ornaments, grass, because actually grasses can be lovely and you're not getting much flowers there. And as Jane was saying, lots of different shades of foliage, because you can get a lot of interest that way.
Okay. I'm going to ask this question. I think everybody can hear me. This is from Kinsushi, I think. I'm in the USA, East Coast, Zone 7A. Can I grow gold flame honeysuckle, a hybrid, with an annual Mandeville vine?
I think it's really difficult to answer specific questions about a gardening zone that we're not in. But what I would suggest you do is go to the person who supplied it, the nurseryman, because the people who grow these and sell them are a fantastic resource. So I'd always say go to your local nurseries, and even if you haven't bought it from a local nursery, go to a local nursery anyway, and they're really good people to talk to about these sorts of things. There's now a group of questions that are all around privacy, and sorry about that. There's now a group of questions all around privacy. We've had people saying, I would like to have some privacy on a budget. I would like to have some privacy because I've got a very small garden and really quite tall walls and lots of buildings and windows looking at me. I've also got screening from neighbours without blocking too much light. And one of the things that I've often said about privacy, we've got quite a lot of articles about privacy on the Middlesized Garden blog, and also some videos about privacy on the Middlesized Garden YouTube channel. And so I'll put those links in the description below. And we also have a book called The Middlesized Garden Complete Guide to Garden Privacy. So I'll put a link to that below. But one of the most important things to really get a grip on is interrupt the sight line. So even if you're in a very big city space and you've got loads and loads of windows, there's only a few that can see directly into your garden. So you look at those and you imagine the person looking out of the window and looking down into your garden, and it's a sight line that goes like that, and you have to interrupt it. And the nearer it is to you, the nearer the tree or the screen is to you, the smaller it can be and the less shade it'll cast. So don't try and put a great big tree on the boundary like that. Think about having a smaller tree or a screen quite close to where you want the privacy. And if you can't get privacy in your whole garden, and you may well not be able to, think about with the sight lines where you can get privacy in a small part of the garden. And another thing that works really well is some kind of slatted or gappy privacy, because you can have a screen that lets light through, and obviously people can see through it. It may be slats of wood, or it may be carved in a pattern, or it may be a wire or something like that, or it may just be an ordinary wooden garden trellis. But people can see that you're on the other side. They can't really see what you're doing. And also they tend to see the structure rather than you. So it gives you some privacy without taking away your light. So those are the two I would say. And of course, a garden trellis wooden doesn't have to be very expensive. I'm going to ask Jane to answer a question that someone's given about how to position a shade tree while I have a look at your questions on the chat. So Jane, tell us about positioning a shade tree.
Well, I think it was somebody who had a front garden that they wanted to put a tree in to give them some shade. It's not difficult actually working out where your tree should go. You just have to observe your garden for a 24-hour period, usually when the sun is shining, because that really helps. And why do you want shade in the garden? Is it because you want to sit there, or is it just that you want to create a shady area for different sorts of plants and things? So I think work out what you want it for. Always in the garden, what do you want to do with your space? If you want to sit in it, very similar to the sight lines that Alexandra was talking about for privacy, work out where your tree is going to give you the most benefit. If the sun is directly facing you and you want shade in the middle of the day, then make sure you observe your garden in the middle of the day when the sun is at its highest, and that will give you the line for your tree. Now, in choosing trees for a garden, it's going to give you shade. It'll also give you shade all the year round if you're not careful. And when I say that, you do not want a socking great leylandii or conifer that's going to be evergreen, that seems to absorb all the light regardless. Actually, even if it's not immediately in front of the sun, they somehow seem to suck everything in, these big leylandis. They serve a purpose, but not in a small garden, I don't think. And they're a bit of a nuisance over here in the UK. I like to use a deciduous tree to give me shade. Because in the winter, you've got that wonderful tracery of branches that surprisingly cuts out quite a lot of if you use it actually for privacy, a tracery of branches even in the winter will give you some of that privacy. So I like to use something that's a bit lighter. So I love a silver birch, because in the winter you've got the wonderful white trunk and that delicate branch structure and glorious sort of bright leaves in the summer. So think about what sort of shade you want, where you get the most sun and therefore going to get the most benefit from the shade, and plant your tree there. Also be very mindful of the height. Some trees get absolutely enormous. So a birch is quite nice. If it's going to be close to the house, make sure it's not something that's going to give root problems to your building. Cherries are particularly bad. They travel for miles. A birch is generally pretty good.
What's the fastest shrub to grow as a hedge for privacy?
I think I'll take this one. And just to warn you that if you have a fast growing shrub, the question, by the way, for anyone who didn't hear, was what's the fastest growing shrub for privacy? If you have a very fast growing shrub, it's going to be quite a lot of maintenance. So I would always say that possibly don't be in too much of a hurry. Certainly privet is probably the one, and you can cut it in very easily into nice shapes. It's called ligustrum, is its Latin name. And I have got a privet hedge, and I cut it probably 3 times a year, whereas a shrub, a hedge, a more slow growing hedge won't have to be cut 3 times a year. So you just have to remember that fast growing is not always what you want. But I'd say privet is pretty good, actually.
Privet's good. I like the Portuguese laurel, Prunus lusitanica. That's very nice. It's a good small leaf, much more of a manageable leaf, and able to keep it down to a size than the normal cherry laurel. I like that. Depending on where you are, Griselinia littoralis it grows wonderfully quickly, and I love the colour of the leaves. So you have to balance the speed of growth with the maintenance and also the cost, because something like Griselinia you put in at this height and will grow up here in no time at all, which is why I particularly like it. But it can burn in the frost, so it depends on where you are. But if you wanted to put in a hedge already that's this height, it's going to cost you a fortune. So you have to balance the cost, the maintenance, and also the visual appeal of it as well.
We've now got a few planting questions, and they're sort of miscellaneous. There's one person who is filling a border along a fence, and some parts of the border have, really filled out, but the others are still quite gappy, and she wants to do it without spending too much money. I think I think there's sort of 2 ways you could go with that. I mean, one of them is obviously to get a couple of packets of seeds in maybe early to mid-spring and plant them, something colourful like cosmos or perhaps snapdragons, and really stuff the border with those annuals. But of course it doesn't really solve the long-term problem, does it? So over to you for the long-term problem.
Thank you. Long-term problems, that's my speciality. I would first ask why you've got gaps in those borders. Is it because you put plants in there and they didn't particularly thrive, or you haven't planted in there yet? So obviously I'm probably not going to answer that. I find when I'm planting a new garden, I will put in shrubs that will grow over time, but I won't expect them to do it for the first 2 or 3 years. And I do love perennials and grasses. Grasses will grow up and make it look very full, very quickly. It used to be called Sniper arundinacea. It's called, oh gosh, what's it called now? Animalanthia lessioniana.
Yeah, Animanthele.
That's it.
But I don't think even that's correct. But anyway,
it's something like that.
Yeah.
I'm sure you'll
Yeah,
just drop us the line. And you'll find it'll go from a little plant like that to this. So you can, I would say, make sure that soil is really good before you plant anything, if things haven't thrived. Could be because it's compacted soil. It might be that you just haven't planted. And things that will grow quickly and fill in really nicely and could be cheap. Some of the salvias. So I love. There's a lovely red salvia called Salvia Greggii, which is one of my favourites that I chop back not too early in the spring. I chop back to sort of this, and then I think, oh gosh, I've got all that spare ground in front of it, and I plant in front of it with some annuals, and then realise that Greggii grows to this size, and every year it catches me out, and I don't know why. It's very silly. So I would say, if you don't want shrubs in the areas that you've got bald bits now, make sure that soil is good. Wait until stuff comes into the garden centre in the spring. There's no point in going and buying it from the garden centre now, because it's their end of year stock and it might not grow very well. And pick a few things that are going to grow to a decent size and give you some good colour. I very rarely plant annuals unless I'm desperate. So I'll plant some cosmos, and I will plant some nicotiana because I love those. They're very good for evening pollinators, moths and things like that, and they smell wonderful. But I love perennials. Perennials will come up in a season and give you a really good show. I mean, Verbena bonariensis, you'll be sick of it. It'll self-seed everywhere. As we talked about the Animalanthia, it's a wonderful filler in semi-shade or in a main border, and will cope with a certain amount of damp, although it doesn't cope very well with two spaniels that are hunting mice in the garden, because one of mine's been crushed. Go for good, cheap doers in the perennial field. Sort of I particularly like echinaceas, the geums, not terribly expensive, but will bulk up and fill a really good spot in a season.
I'd say that also, if you want to fill an awful lot of space very quickly, and there's daylilies. The daylilies, they just spread. I mean, they are lovely. I've decided to get rid of mine because they spread too much, and of course that is always the problem. But if you want to save money, then a few plants that really travel are really worth it.
Yes, which is that Verbena, and daylilies, their Latin name's Hemeracalis, and they're orange, they're yellow, they're sort of more magenta-y colours. Yeah.
There is one question that's just really, I think, quite simple one, which is how to reach plants in a big border, because we've talked about big borders. And certainly the gardens I've seen, there are two ways, and in fact you could use both. And one is that a friend of mine always puts a few little bricks. She just works them into the borders, just a place she can stand on. And of course, when the flowers are up and the foliage is up, you don't see the bricks or the stones in the border. And then of course there are quite a lot where, if you've got a big border in front of a fence or a hedge, is to have a little path just along the back, and once again it'll just be a little narrow path and you won't really see it. I don't know if you've anything to add to that, Jane.
I think that's a really good, they're really good suggestions. For me, I don't really go into my borders once everything has grown up. And I don't mind getting my feet muddy either, so I don't really bother with doing that with mine, to be honest. I just tramp through the border and do what I have to do. I would say, though, that being said, the one thing you don't want to do is get on your borders if they're very wet. I mean, currently we've had so much rain over here in the UK, and by marching all over your borders when it's very wet will really damage your soil. It'll compact it, and then you'll have to be sorting it out and putting compost on it. I would say just treat your soil gently, and at this time of the year, if it's not too tidy, then it's not the end of the world, because it's quite good for your soil to leave it undisturbed and untrodden on.
Right, and now we've had a few other soil problems. which is people saying that they've got either very thin soil or very rocky soil, and what should they do about it? And I think really there are two answers, and one is add lots of mulch and well-rotted garden compost and well-rotted manure and things to it. But also, I think, don't you think, there's a certain element about planting for those spare rocky soils, which could be dry garden planting, gravel garden planting, rock garden planting, and plants that really will survive. Because I think it's really hard to fundamentally change your soil. I think you can improve it, but to completely change it, I personally find difficult. What do you think?
No, absolutely agree. When I was, my old tutor used to say, you know, switch whether you want to grow acid lovers or, you know, in an alkaline soil, save your money, don't bother. You know, work with what you've got. Yes, you can improve it. Put in as much organic matter as you can manage, but, you know, you're not going to change the soil. I think there was some ridiculous figure that they quoted at us. In order to change the soil by putting on lots and lots and lots of mulch over the years, it took 150 years. So, you know, you're never going to do it, basically. If there are special things that you want to plant, put them in a pot, place the pot in the border. I know Great Dixter very often move pots into a border to fill a gap in the middle of, you know, when something's died. So improve your soil. If you want to plant something, dig a big hole and fill it with lots of lovely soil. Don't just put compost in there. Improve some topsoil with compost, because otherwise it just all dries out too quickly. You want the loam in there as well. Plants are incredibly resilient. If you go into a wood and you see a tree that self-seeded itself on a bank and the roots are sticking out at an angle and you think, how on earth has it planted itself there? Plants are incredible. They will get there, but you've got to give them a good starting point. If you're very clayey, don't plant and you're in a cold area, don't plant things that don't like being waterlogged, because actually that waterlogged cold soil will kill off roots faster than anything. So improve the soil as much as you can. And then a very good tip from a garden designer many years ago, go and have a look at your local area, see what grows naturally in the wild, because it's coping with the natural conditions, and take inspiration from that. So if you're coastal, go and see what grows well in the coast. And, you know, if it's a shaded area, or if there are rhododendrons growing, you know it's going to be an acid soil, and try and work with it as much as you can. I mean, I know we all bend gardens and plants to our will, but there's nature will out at the end of the day.
I also think in terms of a limited space is that this is where raised beds can be helpful, because you can have some really nice ornamental raised beds. The only thing I would say about raised beds is they sort of, for a while, became the answer to everything. And they're definitely not the answer to everything, because they do drain very well. So if you've got a heavy clay soil and you can have some lovely raised beds perhaps near the house, so you're full of the plants you've always longed to grow but which don't usually grow on your soil, that works very well. But if you're in quite a dry area, which we are, I find that my raised beds really do drain rather too fast. So once again, that pushes you back to a very drought-resistant planting. But certainly, you know, if you're thinking about some borders close to the house, you want a big show, possibly raised beds would be, or as Jane says, of course, pots, and wedging the pots in there so that they're covered up by the foliage. And that's a really good one, isn't it?
It is. I mean, you talk about raised beds. In my garden, I have a very shady side of the garden. And talking garden privacy, somebody many years ago had planted a row of limes to shade the garden from the houses that backed onto that side. So when I moved in, there was nowhere to plant on the left-hand side. The roots for the limes were very close to the surface. And I couldn't grow anything. I couldn't get a spade in there. And we put some raised beds, and we used Gabion baskets, which is a whole nother story, but we filled them with, and protected the trunks of these limes, because they're an integral part of our garden. So you protect the trunks, but then built the raised beds between them, and they're deep enough and they're shady enough and moist enough to grow some beautiful hydrangeas down there. So it really does depend what part of the garden you're creating raised beds to get over your issue of not being able to plant in very hospitable soil.
I think actually that some people might really like to see Jane's garden, and the name of the video is A Contemporary Garden Design on the Cheap, but I will put a link to it when this has been, at the end of this video, it will all be processed and then it'll be available to view as a normal video, not just a live, and I will be able to add things in, like a description. So I'll add links to Jane's garden and to the privacy videos and things like that. So, because I can imagine it must be quite frustrating for you thinking, oh, what do those gabions look like? And they do look gorgeous. So definitely I will put Jane's video in there.
They do look gorgeous. They do look gorgeous.
And actually somebody's also said, what's Jane's surname? And so I'll say, it's Jane Beedle. I expect that's someone wanting to look you up on Bake Off or something, I think.
Yes, cupcakes are house speciality at the moment.
So let's see what else we've got here. This is an interesting one. Actually, I'm also very interested in. Winter interest under deciduous trees.
Oh,
now,
yes.
I have found that under deciduous trees, of course, bulbs are fantastic because, and this is what is absolutely lovely, but of course they're not winter interest, they're spring interest. And I'm looking at some deciduous trees and I'm clearing out the border, and I had some cornus, but they didn't really work because they weren't getting their full fiery winter bark interest because it was so shady. So I don't know what to do within these. Mine is between a silver birch and a cotinus. This one is, I think, silver birch and a maple. So, what is your advice? Winter interest under shady trees?
Well, actually, there's a remarkable amount of stuff that can go under shady trees. It depends how shady. So I have a beautiful birch. I'm very fond of my birch. And that's not quite so shady in the winter. And under it I have got Cornus Midwinter Fire, which I keep very well cut down because all the colour comes from the new growth or the previous season's growth. And I don't want it getting too big, which it can do. And that works beautifully under there. Hellebores are fantastic under deciduous trees, regardless of whether they're in the shade or really, don't want to be too sunny, but in the shade from the tree will actually provide the shade for them on a sunny spot. So hellebores are lovely in the winter. Sarcococca, which is the Christmas box. So I've got mine up near my birch at the moment and by my shed door, which I go into every day. The scent of the sarcococca at this time of the year is absolutely fantastic, and any insects that are woken up by a sunny day are out there buzzing around because it's sort of nectar full for this time of the year. So we can put together a nice list of things for you to plant underneath the tree, but I would say hellebores mixed with snowdrops, because of course they are winter flowering. A glorious carpet. If you want something, you don't want shrubs, you want them to disappear, you've got a cyclamen coombe, which will soon naturalise underneath a tree, and they're very low growing and you won't know it's there, and then suddenly you've got these wonderful little pink flowers in the middle of winter. So there's quite a lot that you can put under a tree and keep it clipped down so that it doesn't interfere with your branches.
Right.
There's a real problem with dry shade. Also, it gets very drafty. The only thing that likes it are cyclamens. Do you have any thoughts?
We've just mentioned cyclamens. Sorry, that was just somebody saying that they have dry shade. Do you think cyclamens are good in dry shade?
Cyclamens seem to grow anywhere. They don't like being wet, though. It's the wet and the cold that will bump off a cyclamen. But dry shade, there's a daphne, and I can't remember what it is, but will grow in woodland. It's marvellous, actually. It's not particularly exciting, but it actually grows really well. Dry shade, Sarcococca will grow in dry shade, which I've just mentioned, the Christmas box. Sarcococca confusa is absolutely lovely. Leucothoe scarletta will grow brilliantly and gives you red tones, loves shade. It's not very happy in bright sunshine. Dry shade, again, pulmonaria doesn't do badly and will give you those very, very pretty flowers in the spring. I can't remember which the variety is now, but you get pink and lilac on the same flower and lovely spotty leaves. Euonymus silver queen everybody goes, oh gosh, euonymus are so dull. But it's that wonderful variegation in a shady spot. You can even get it to climb up a fence, actually, the euonymus silver queen. And once it gets going, it's marvellous, and it's great for flower arranging as well. And of course, it's evergreen. So there are a lot that you can grow in dry shade. Ferns. Some of the ferns are perfect. I can't remember the one that I grow. Mine's gone, sorry, getting old late in the day. But some of the dry, shady, the ferns work very well in dry shade. So you could just do a combination of several things to give you interest all through.
And someone actually in the comments has made a good suggestion, which is Orchida japonica, which is that very unfashionable in Britain shrub, which I absolutely love, which has got sort of yellow spotted leaves. And we've got a bit in our very dry, shady corner. We've got an Orchida japonica, which actually gives me great joy because it just sort of bounces out of the shade.
It does.
Yellow spotted leaf, it goes, hi, I'm here. And you think, oh yes, I really love that.
And if you don't like the idea of yellow spotted leaves, there are varieties of I call it a Cuba.
Yeah, I'm sure you're right.
I don't know that it is. Sorry, I'm touching my microphone, so I hope I'm not making noise. They do some with the white variegation as well, which works very well. And some of the Pieris do pretty well, but that has to be acid soil.
Right, let's see what else we've got here. Yes, Christmas box sells the vine, which yes, they absolutely do. And
don't forget the Daphnes as well. I have a Daphne by my front door. And my Daphne Adora, Aurea marginata mine is, or Daphne Adora. And it's just about to come into full bloom now. And you put it by a front door or a back door or wherever you're going to smell it regularly. And there's this little joyful pink flower and wonderful scent, sort of January, February, exactly when you need it.
There's a quick, actually it's not really a garden design one, but it is something I can answer quite quickly. A question here about lavender saying, should you cut it back every year? Absolutely, it'll get very, very leggy. And it's also as if you're going to cut it back if you're going to cut it for the flowers, should you cut it back? Absolutely. I cut back my lavender really hard every year. It's now 11 years old and it's looking fantastic. It will have to come out fairly soon. And you often see they say, oh, just trim it lightly. It may depend on the kind of lavender and the effect you want, but I would just say cut it back hard. What do you think?
Well, if anybody has been down to France or even seen pictures of the lavender fields in Provence, all terribly neat, they don't worry about just cutting it back lightly. Chop it back into a very neat little ball. And people will say, don't cut back into the old wood and it won't reshoot. Well, I find it does. So I'm a great believer in making plants do what you want them to do. And if they then die, just chuck them out and don't give them another chance.
Yes, I think it's always I think I certainly felt, a bit frightened, oh, I don't want to kill the plant. But actually, plants are very resilient. It's amazing what they actually can survive. And you learn so much. And all the top gardeners that I talk to say, oh, well, I've killed thousands of plants. And they've learned such a lot doing it. So I think we don't have to worry too much about experimenting, because that's how you get the garden you want in the end, is by trying something and thinking, oh, that didn't work. Oh, that worked rather well. Oh, that worked quite well. And so on.
And making good friends with somebody who's got a garden that you love, because you can then persuade them to give you plants as well.
Right, let's have a look at this. Vertical structure for veg. Somebody says they would like to have some vertical structure for their veg growing, and they also want to know about how to decorate a fence. And they were thinking of putting maize and sunflowers alternately in front of it, which actually I think sounds absolutely gorgeous. But I think we might have some other ideas. What would you think about vertical structure for your veg?
Vertical, I'm not a great veg grower, to be perfectly honest. I think it's wonderful, and I tried it this year in planting bags because I don't really have much space, and it wasn't terribly successful. But I would say fences are perfect for climbing veg, and we have a lovely house and garden not far from where we live, and they were planting squash on an arch. I suppose you might bash your head as you walk through on some of these squash. So yes, grow things up, anything if you can, and as long as it's going to be supported. Runner beans, marvellous up a fence. Not everybody gets climbing beans. Our running beans are climbing beans. Just I am fortunate or unfortunate in that I have a walled garden. A wall takes an awful lot of moisture away from the soil immediately in front of it. So watering veg is quite difficult when you've got a walled garden. But I would say just go for it. And veg aside, if you want to decorate a fence, put some good climbers up it. If you want, what are they called? Black-eyed Susans. I can't remember what they're called. Wonderful annual climbers. Absolutely lovely. Give you colour right through to the first frost. But if you don't want to be continually planting, but you want it to be productive, a nice vine. My vine is rampant it's the one plant that I've, apart from my pollarded limes, that I inherited when I got my garden. It travels about 6, 7, 8 meters down my garden and is abundant with grapes all the way through. Some lovely evergreen climbers. The Trachelospermum jasminoides, the star jasmine. There's Trachelospermum asiaticum as well, which is slightly creamier colour, sort of more, slightly yellow tinge. Beautiful. Once it's got going, it's evergreen, wonderful jasmine scented flowers. So a mix of veg maybe, and a mix of beautiful climbers. And don't forget the clematis, because I adore clematis.
Exactly, and those are bringing pollinators, which of course is really quite good for your veg garden.
Yes.
And one thing that actually grows very well up a fence here is hops, because we're a great hop growing area here in Kent. The only thing about hops is they do tend to sort of take off from the sky. My brother has one in his garden, and it sort of heads up to the bathroom window and heads towards the guttering. But actually you might be able to tie it in if you want to keep it a bit lower than that. But of course you can then make perhaps your own lager or beer with it, or indeed use it to make hop pillows in order to induce sleep.
You could. Yes.
On the other hand, you might
I'm
just
not going to
enjoy
do
the
that. But talking of hops, the golden hop is beautiful.
Yes.
It's absolutely beautiful and nowhere near as rampant. And it's delightful combined with a purple clematis, because that comes up through the golden leaves and you have this wonderful purple clematis, and then it all gets pruned back. If it's a late flowering clematis, it all just gets pruned back at the same time, which is a nice, lovely combination. I did notice that you had a question earlier. Somebody was asking whether they should plant English ivy up their house.
Yes.
Absolutely not. Not if you want to maintain drain pipes, any sort of cladding, brickwork. I would find something a bit nicer to put up your house rather than English ivy.
Could perhaps defend English ivy on this one, as it is a wonderful, wonderful plant for wildlife. And the RHS have been doing studies, I think, growing it against a grid so that it's not against the brick. But you would have to have some way of making sure that you could prune it once a year at least to stop it from going, as Jane says, into the guttering and onto the woodwork and through the windows.
Find something else. Put your ivy on a fence and leave your house for something that's not going to be quite so destructive. And don't forget it's really dusty as well. It'll make you sneeze and cough and
You've got a specific design question a couple of minutes ago from EE. Do you want to read it out or shall I do it?
Oh, hang on. EE?
Shall I do it? It's about the fourth comment from the last person. I'll read it.
Yes, I've got it. I want to split a new garden in different rooms. Would it be too busy to lay out three different styles behind one another? Modern followed by classic followed by wildflower meadow. I think it'd be fine, don't you?
I think it could be fine.
Yeah.
It depends on how you tie it together. I don't think so. If you go to a lot of beautiful gardens in big famous gardens over here, they very often have different styles.
I think it might be nice to have something that links the two. For instance, if you perhaps keep the pathways the same throughout, or maybe if you take a colour or a colour theme and repeat it. So if perhaps you loved, purple or something, maybe you have something purple in every bit of the garden. Those might help tie it together.
Yes, it could do. But I mean, if you want to go, say you want to do I think I wouldn't worry too much. To be honest, as long as it's, when you're in one, you don't see the other. So I would say go for a proper divide, walk through an arch, however you want to get from one bit to the other. So you don't want to look from one straight into the other. That might then get a bit complicated. But I think do what you like with it. I think that sounds really rather nice and interesting. Gives you all sorts of opportunities for different planting and different sort of ornaments, if that's the way you want to deal with it.
One of the very early gardens that really inspired me to get interested in gardening was a very long, thin garden behind a house in the countryside, and immediately behind, outside the back door, they had a little raised vegetable garden, and then you went into a little lawn, and then you went into a little rose garden, and then you went into, I think, some herbaceous border, and then right at the very end there was this, 3 or 4 apple trees with a lovely meadow underneath. I mean, it was lots of change of garden, but it was the most magical garden, and I've always remembered it. So I think you can do an enormous amount.
You can. I think the transitions between different areas in the garden, you need to give a glimpse so that as you're walking in one part, you think, oh, that looks interesting. What's around the corner? I know it sounds really corny, but it's the journey through a garden. So you want something to give you enough interest to drag you into the next bit. And then you get into the next bit and you go, oh, wow, I didn't expect it to be Japanese or Renaissance or whatever. So I think it could work really nicely.
I think that this is probably, we've come to the end. If
have we
people
already?
It's been 3/4 of an hour, and I'm slightly reminded that our batteries may not last. So if you have got any other questions, do please, leave them in the comments below when this is uploaded as a normal video. But, thank you for joining us, and thank you, Jane.
Oh, always a pleasure.
And goodbye.
Yes, goodbye. Enjoy your weekend.
Yes, enjoy your weekend.